Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Creeps and Coffee, where you guys are stuck with me. Jamie is unfortunately feeling a little under the weather, so I get the chance to do some extra yapping all on my own this week.
This is Jamie doing a voice memo, so that everyone can hear that I have lost my voice. Because apparently it sounds really funny.
And I'm very excited to be back for, I think this is the second week in a row of me doing a solo show. So, hello. I hope you're okay with that. You're going to have to be because you're stuck with me for right now. But this week, I am excited to jump into a different kind of topic, one that is a little inspired by pop culture, which I will talk about in a second here. A little true crime, a little just weird human interactions, because again, it's a consistent theme across the board with our show, but especially in a lot of the stories that I seem to pick up on, that humans are really the scariest creatures of all. And the way that the situation that we're going to discuss today was handled really showcases that humans not considering the repercussions of their actions is the basis for a lot of stories that capture our attention in shows like these. So, to jump back to the pop culture thing, Jamie and I were talking about movies and films that are coming out. As you all likely know by now, Jamie and I are big movie people, specifically horror films, thriller films, anything in that sort of genre. So there was a trailer for a film called Primate that we both saw. And we were chatting a little bit, and Jamie mentioned how the story in the film Primate, without any spoilers, I haven't seen it, so I guess I can't really spoil it. I've just seen the trailer. But Jamie pointed out how the story in the film Primate mirrored a real life story that I know quite well. And we're going to jump into another weird hyperfixation story of mine. And that is the story of Travis the chimp. So this is the story of Travis the chimpanzee. It's going to be a story of love, of denial, of instinct, and about the moment that those things collide in the worst possible way. So let's dive right in.
I'm Kait.
And I'm Jaim, and this is Creeps and Coffee,
A show where we talk about the dark parts of the world around us.
Cryptids, conspiracies, things that go bump in the night,
And the crimes behind the scariest creatures of all, humans.
Join us as we take a look at the stories sure to give you the creeps.
Pull up a seat, grab a coffee,
and let's have a chat.
For those of you who don't know the story of Travis the chimp and why he is, I guess, a famous case in true crime, in topic of conversation, I guess you could say, a lot of it stems from the 911 call specifically. So there's a 911 call from 2009 that's often described as one of the most disturbing ever recorded. In the call, a woman is screaming, not panicked, hysterical, and she tells the dispatcher her friend is being attacked. But not by a person, not by a dog, by a chimpanzee. And not just any chimpanzee, but a chimp that she raised like her own child.
Send the police.
What's the problem there?
The chimp killed my friend. The police have with a gun. He's killing my girlfriend. He's killing my friend.
Who's killing your friend?
My chimpanzee. He ripped her apart. Hurry up.
With a gun.
He ripped her face off.
He ripped her face off?
So, to understand what happened that day, we need to start with a dangerous idea. And that idea is that a wild animal can become human if you just love it enough. And I am really bad for being a supporter of this idea. My partner tells me often that he thinks that camping will be the death of me, or being out in nature will be the death of me, because I will see a bear and I will have the toxic perception that I can tame it, I can hug it, and I'll be different. And that will very clearly end poorly for me. But the reality is, wild animals are wild for a reason. And domestication doesn't happen overnight, and it certainly doesn't happen circumstance by circumstance with wild animals. Instinct is at the core of all that they do, and that's really what we'll see here. So Travis, the chimpanzee, was born in 1995. I feel like every time I say Travis the chimp, it's like the chimp is just his last name, and he's a weird, quirky character. But we're talking about a monkey, just so that everyone is on the same page. A real chimpanzee. Travis was born in 1995, and just 3 days later, he was taken from his mother and brought into a human home, which, let's not even dive into that realm of things and how cruel and twisted it is to take an animal, specifically one that young, away from its mother. And he was sold to and raised by a woman named Sandra Harold in Stamford, Connecticut. And from the beginning, he wasn't treated like an animal. He was treated like a son. Travis wore clothes. He sat at the table. He drank from glasses. He watched television. Travis could open doors, use keys. He could respond to cues. He appeared in commercials. He was in a car commercial. To the outside world, Travis was very charming. He was well known in the community. He was out and about often. It was a cool thing to see. You saw a monkey. I can't lie. I can't pretend that I am above any of that, and that if I saw someone walking down the street with a monkey, that I wouldn't be intrigued and want to know more about this animal. And to Sandra, he was family. He had his own room in their house, his own bedroom. He was really an extension of their family. And Sandra was married. She had a normal life. By all means, she was a typical woman, you could say. She just really had this affinity for her monkey. And again, we go back to this notion that you cannot love the wild out of an animal. And there's something important specifically about chimpanzees that people tend to forget. They are not domesticated. They are not other humans, despite being our closest living relatives. They're not like dogs, where they're your furry friend that will love you and care for you endlessly and be by your side. They're not even close. Chimpanzees are incredibly intelligent creatures, but they are also deeply territorial, intensely hierarchical, and capable of extreme violence. By adulthood, a male chimpanzee can be several times stronger than a human, and when they attack, they don't just attack to hurt. They attack to kill. For years, Travis seemed like an exception to this rule. But there were cracks. In 2003, he escaped from Sandra's car and ran through traffic, causing chaos before being recaptured. Not only was this chaos brushed off, but the local policeman knew Travis because he was such a staple in the community and didn't consider the fact that he was becoming stronger and potentially more dangerous to their community, and that he was becoming increasingly more difficult to be recaptured if something like this were to happen again. Because as he was getting older, he became harder to manage in the way that humans go through puberty and this influx of hormones and testosterone. And if you think of a male teenager, teenage boys tend to become more aggressive. They become more dominant and they try to prove that dominance in the world more often. And in Travis's world, in the animal kingdom, that happens as well, just in a much more elevated, intense way. Travis started to experience mood swings and agitation, and there are reports that Sandra began giving him anti-anxiety medication. And here's where things become extra complicated, because from Sandra's perspective, she wasn't doing something reckless. She was trying to help someone that she loved. But love doesn't override biology, and Travis was entering full adulthood, where there was no line of maybe we can control this, maybe we can help. It very quickly became clear that he was not in an environment that was conducive to a wild animal successfully thriving. So that brings us to February 16th, 2009. On the afternoon of February 16th, 2009, something was already off. Travis was agitated. We don't know exactly why. Obviously, we can't ask the chimp. But as I said, the mood swings, the agitation, the aggressiveness, that was all very stereotypical, very by the book of an adult male chimpanzee. He is trying to be the head of the household, but also keep in mind, he's cooped up in a bedroom, in a home, all day. He's being drugged up with medications that are not meant for wild animals. And everything is piling on. It could have been agitation from a disruption in routine. There could have been outside stressors. Maybe it was something as simple and as devastating as confusion. But Sandra was really struggling to get control over Travis. And that day, Sandra called her friend, Charla Nash, to come help. Charla had been around Travis before, plenty of times, since he was young. She was not a stranger. But when Charla stepped out of her car, Travis didn't see a friend. He saw something else. And what happened next unfolded in minutes, but those minutes would change everything. Without warning, without hesitation, Travis charged Charla. He went straight for her face, her hands, the parts of the body for a human that define your identity, that allow you to interact with the world. Sandra tried to stop him, but she's fighting against an animal that's a couple 100 pounds with the strength of several full-grown men. She hit him with a shovel. It didn't work. She stabbed him with a knife. It didn't work. And at this point, she did the only thing she could do. And she called 911. Now, I remember hearing this 911 call for the first time when I was going through true crime videos. I would have been in high school. I believe there was, don't quote me on this, and I could Google it right now to confirm before I talk out of my ass, but I believe there was some interview either on Oprah. I feel like it was Oprah. I was going to give another option, but I'm pretty confident it was Oprah. Some talk show that was Oprah-esque discussing this case. And I remember hearing the clip, a very, very short clip of the 911 call for the first time. And I have never felt my heart sink to my stomach from the sounds that were coming off of this call. On that call, Sandra is screaming. She is begging for someone to come help. And at one point she says, "He's killing my friend." And the dispatcher doesn't know how to respond. They hesitate because it sounds impossible. No one thinks that you're going to pick up a call, especially as a 911 dispatcher. I'm sure I have family that do it. They have heard some horrible things. But I'm sure you never expect to hear of an animal like a chimpanzee attacking someone in a suburban home. But it was real, and they really did need as much help as physically possible. When the police do arrive, the scene is just beyond comprehension. To put it quite plainly, there's blood everywhere. Charla Nash is barely alive, and Travis is still there. He is still aggressive. He didn't complete this attack and rip off this woman's face and hands and hair and calm down. He goes after the officers, and this is when they fire their guns. But because of the size and the pure strength behind this wild animal, even after being shot, he doesn't immediately go down. He retreats back into the house, back into his bedroom, and he passes away shortly after. As much as I could go into specifics of Travis and his story, I do also want to focus on Charla. Because by all accounts, Charla Nash should not have survived. Her injuries were, the only word for it is catastrophic. She lost her face, her hands, her ability to see normally. Doctors placed Charla in a medically induced coma, and over a period of time, she underwent dozens of procedures, most significant of which came in 2011 when she received a full face transplant. And it was one of the most complex surgeries ever attempted. And somehow, she lived. As shocking as this story is, it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. And there's a few other stories of very similar cases that I do want to touch on. The most comparable case being that of James Davis and his attack in 2005. So in this circumstance, Davis had a pet chimp formerly named Mo. Mo was given to a California sanctuary, which was, I'm gonna say the right decision. The right decision would not be to have a pet chimp in the first place, but allowing them to be in a sanctuary is definitely the better approach than keeping them in a bedroom in your home. And in this California sanctuary, they allowed James Davis and his wife to come visit Mo. In this case, 2 different chimpanzees escaped and attacked him and his wife. But the similarities to Travis are undeniable. There's this sudden explosive violence and targeted mutilation. They went straight for the face, straight for the hands, straight for the extremities. These victims were familiar with the chimps. They were not random strangers. And the attack involved multiple minutes of sustained assault. It didn't matter what anybody tried to do to pull these chimps away. They were locked in on their target. Davis was unfortunately left permanently disfigured, losing body parts and requiring lifelong care. However, also like Charla Nash, he survived. Another similar attack was by a trained TV chimp named Pan Kun, who attacked a handler during a show-related setting. And I bring up this because Travis was also kind of a show chimp, if you will. I briefly mentioned there that he had been in a car commercial and had been used for local advertising because, as I said, again, the locals were quite intrigued by him being in their community and really wanted to use that to their advantage, which I think adds to this idea of them being domesticated when you see them in something commercialized, when you see them in a quote-unquote professional setting. But even professional chimps that are used in entertainment can turn without warning, and that's exactly what happened in 2012 when Pan Kun attacked their handler. The victim suffered deep cuts to their face and body, and despite years of training and building a relationship, building a connection, the attack was sudden and unprovoked. It showcased again the intensity of instinctual behaviors and how cues that are potentially subconsciously given by humans can be perceived by other living creatures. And when the other living creature happens to have the strength of several fully grown men, it's not necessarily going to end well. I think it's also important to look at the fact that attacks like this are not based on irresponsibility in the common era, if you will. There's also attacks going back to the 1930s, if we look at Hollywood, and the story of Jiggs the monkey. Jiggs attacked an actress named Dorothy Lamour on set of a film that they were shooting in the 1930s. And it shows that, again, this is not a modern phenomenon. It's not irresponsibility. It's not, well, it is irresponsibility, but it's not irresponsibility caused by modernity. It's not a case of improper training or something of that nature where it can be placed on, oh, well, things are different today. Because the reality is, even early, again, quote unquote, trained chimps were unpredictable and dangerous. These are not domesticated animals, regardless of how professional or trained or loved that they are still wild animals. And even when you look at wild and semi-wild attacks amongst chimpanzees, particularly in Africa and where a lot of the research on chimpanzees and chimp behavior is taken place, what happens in the wild is exactly what happened in the cases I've talked about, from Travis to the other attacks. There's documented cases of children being attacked and killed by chimpanzees, even infant abductions and cannibalism. I mean, there's at least 6 cases of chimpanzees killing and eating human babies that have been recorded. Obviously, that is not the norm. I'm not turning this around and saying that chimpanzees are the most evil creatures of all time by any means, but you also have to realize that in the wild, humans are not the norm. They are competitors because they're so similar. They are intruders because they're in a space that does not belong to them. And in rare cases, they are prey because of these factors, particularly if they are smaller or weaker than the animal at hand, than that creature that can be given the role of predator at the time. And ultimately, what ties these cases together is the striking consistencies of different factors. There's this notion of targeted violence. Chimpanzees don't attack randomly. They're not leap in and just go for what you can get. They go for the face. They go for the hands. They go for the genitals, unfortunately. I mean, all of it is unfortunate, but you really don't want them going there. And I mean, that's seen in both Travis and the Davis case. Another consistency is this idea of a sudden switch, where animals that are described as gentle or well-trained or like family then attack with no warning signs that are visible to humans. But that's also the key factor there, is that it's because they are not on the same wavelength as we are. Not to say that they are more intelligent or less intelligent. We're just fundamentally different creatures who have different patterns, different cues for different things. And humans do not understand the cues that they can be giving off and how those things can necessarily be perceived. And when you throw in the hormones that are being introduced in puberty and this desire to establish dominance in something as hierarchical as the animal kingdom, many of these attacks are going to occur at this point of sexual maturity. This aggression, again, is tied to these dominance instincts, this challenge to the hierarchy that seems to exist, particularly in the males of the species. And that risk multiplies based on the environment. So chimps outside structured zoo environments are far more dangerous than their counterparts that are in genuine sanctuaries and being taken care of, but given the freedom to act on those instincts. And it harkens back to, in my mind, the Tiger King and this notion that tigers that are being held captive in these little zoos like Joe Exotic or the zoos with Carol Baskin, they're zoos that are not letting these animals live up to their full potential. They're not genuine sanctuaries. They're just places where they can be used as tools to make money, quite frankly. And while Travis wasn't a pawn to make money necessarily, he was a replacement for this affection and this love and this familyness, making the point that there is no structure that is relevant to his species. There's no structure in a home environment that is beneficial to a creature who needs a lot of space, who needs to be able to express his feelings and his instincts, his desires in a social setting, in a broader spectrum than what they can do in a bedroom. Again, those environments, Travis was in a house. In the Davis case, it was close contact and close human contact at a sanctuary. Very similar, again, going back to the whole Joe Exotic situation. For Pankun and Jigs in the 1930s, they're both in entertainment settings where, again, these chimps are not given the opportunity to properly be chimps and be these wild animals. They are expected to domesticate and somehow adhere to human morality when that is fundamentally not how they are wired. Now, what's different about Travis and why Travis's case stands out? Travis is considered the most infamous of these cases because of the severity of the injuries. Unfortunately, in Travis's case, it's well documented how face and hands were completely destroyed. It was infamous because the victim survived, which is very rare in extreme cases, especially in cases that are as extreme as this. It occurred in a suburban home. Again, it's very infamous because it feels close to home. Most of us can't imagine what it's like to own a shitty sanctuary or to work in Hollywood as someone who trains animals. But we all live in homes. We all know what it's like to have our home and our space. And to imagine something that horrible happening in your own space, it's a lot more feasible to picture and be affected by than some extenuating circumstance. And again, this 911 call and the media coverage that came out of this was widely broadcast, so it naturally sparked a lot more conversation. And it became a turning point in public awareness of exotic pet risks, which unfortunately is a topic that needs to be covered a lot more, but it definitely sparked the conversation. At the end of the day, when we think, why did Travis attack, there's no single answer. But experts can point to a combination of factors. Again, there's instinct, there's maturity, there's environment, there's stress, and there's one more thing at the end of it, and that's a fundamental misunderstanding. Chimpanzees are not humans. They are not pets. And no amount of love is going to change that. After the attack, there were lawsuits. There were settlements. There were new discussions about exotic animal laws, which is incredibly important. But for the people involved, the consequences were far more personal. Sandra Harold lost her friend and the animal she considered her child. Charla Nash lost nearly everything and had to rebuild a life from unimaginable trauma. So the story of Travis the chimp isn't just one about one violent moment. It's about what happens when we blur this line between wild and domestic, between what an animal is and what we want an animal to be. Because sometimes the line doesn't just blur, it breaks. And when it does, the consequences can be irreversible. And this case is an obvious example of not being able to take something like that back. So what ultimately happened for Charla Nash was she sued Harold's estate. She also attempted to sue the state for exotic animal laws, which would have brought into question the legality behind the ownership of Travis the chimp in the first place. Ultimately, that attempt to sue the state was unsuccessful, but Charlotte did end up with a settlement of around $4 million. In theory, and I see a lot of stories, a lot of comments about how, she got $4 million out of it. That's from the insurance and from the estate. And sure, that's great. You also have to keep in mind, healthcare in the United States is not free by any means. And even with the best insurance coverage, having a full face transplant in 2011, I guarantee you was not covered by insurance. And I guarantee you all of the surgeries and therapies and medicines and everything that Charla Nash would have needed and probably still needs to properly heal from this attack, I'm sure $4 million is chump change. Not to mention the fact that her life is now irreversibly damaged and will never be the same. It's sad that people tend to see just the monetary side of things. But what ended up coming from it as well, which I think would be even more meaningful, is the stronger exotic animal laws that came out in multiple states. And there was renewed push for the Captive Primate Safety Act in the US, which increased the scrutiny of private ownership of primates for very obvious, very good reason. So when you think of a film being made like Primate, where someone owns an exotic pet and it turns into a nightmare, it's horrifying, but it's also the unfortunate reality based on the negligence and selfishness of humans who want to have ownership, have power, have some sort of say over these creatures, which, as I'm saying it now, as much as I said before that it's the chimpanzees that tend to have this hierarchical instinct, it seems that humans do too, because we have this desire to be the top. We have this desire innately to want to domesticate these creatures because we think they need to be like us or they need to serve us in some way. Whereas that's not the case. We can live in harmony with these creatures without shoving them into our backyards, without forcing them into silly clothes for our own entertainment, without taking them away from environments where they can thrive because we're too selfish to want to be away from them. I don't think this is just in terms of exotic animals. I think there are plenty of animals that have been domesticated that are struggling with these same issues. But ultimately, what intrigues me about this case is how often the media portrays Travis like the problem. And I hesitate in saying it that way because obviously, yes, this chimp did attack an individual severely, and it was an individual that he was comfortable with, familiar with, that sort of thing. However, it's not his fault. And I think that's maybe a controversial thing to say, but again, he's a wild animal. You don't get to put jeans and a plaid shirt on him and take him to the car dealership and let him hang out in his room and watch TV and pretend that he's your teenage son, because he's not. He's a few 100-pound creature with the strength of several grown men who has a mind of his own, and there's nothing that you can physically, mentally do to stop him. And I don't think Charla blames him, but I think it's very easy for people to get caught up in this idea of domestication and look at him as this vicious, the way you would look at a son who murdered his aunt or some criminal in that sense, where you look at it from the perspective of humanity and the morality behind humans. It's important to make it very clear he is not a human. Again, he is a wild animal who did what wild animals do when frustrated, when stressed, when provoked. And he's also, keep in mind, under the effects of Xanax that were being given to him. That's not gonna uncloud his judgment either. Again, the biggest factor behind why it really happened is not the hormonal changes or the improper environment or it being a misunderstood species or psychological confusion, anything of that sort. It's the humanization of a fundamentally wild animal. And the discussion of Travis in the media continues that humanization while forgetting how to properly handle wild animal attacks. I don't know. It's a very fine line between right and wrong in this case, because we don't have the capacity to ask Travis. Even if he hadn't been shot by the police, he wouldn't be able to communicate to us in a way that we would necessarily understand, verbal communication, sign language, whatever it may be. He wouldn't be able to communicate to us effectively what he was going through, what he was experiencing. So we will never have that answer. But what we do fundamentally understand is that Travis's owners, his quote-unquote parents, failed not just Travis, but Charla, and potentially anyone that could have come into contact with Travis by neglecting his actual needs and servicing their own in keeping him around. And it's a story that I think sparks a lot of interesting discussion in the true crime world, in the discussion of culpability and where fault really lies. Does fault really lie on anyone in this case? I'd say yes. Some people say no, that it was just a crazy circumstance. But again, it's all based on your own perspective. It's all subjective. I thought it would be an interesting topic to bring up just to start that conversation about where you guys stand on it. What do you think the deciding factor was? How do you think you would navigate a circumstance like that? What is it that makes us so badly want to keep these creatures and domesticate them as if it's our right at all? And that this is coming from a person who would love to have any of these animals. If I could have tiny pocket-sized versions of them in my home. If I could have a house hippo, like those old commercials in Canada, 1,000,000 times I would say yes. I would have so many house hippos, you wouldn't be able to stop me. Does that mean I'm going to bring a hippo into my home and subject my partner and my child to the instinctual aggressive behavior of one of the most dangerous animals on the planet? No, I'm not going to do that just because a tiny little hippo on TV used to eat peanut butter and live in shoes. That's not how that's going to work. I can tell that my ADHD medication is wearing off because now I don't know how I got onto the idea of a house hippo. However, all of this is to say that I would really love to hear your perspective on a case like this, on how humans interact with animals and how that should be taken into consideration when creating these laws to protect the animals in the most effective ways. How things are wherever you live, because I know it's very different even between Canada and the US, between different provinces, between different states, between other countries beyond North America. So I'm very intrigued to hear what your perspective is on this topic and on the story of Travis the chimp and how everyone in the situation was ultimately let down. Travis's owners by being kind of led astray by whoever they were able to buy Travis from. Travis by literally everyone around him for being in the situation he was in his entire life. obviously Charla for being taken advantage of and put in a position of danger by someone who she believed she could trust as a friend, and the community at large in being conned into thinking that this was entertainment when ultimately it was a risk for everyone. Yeah, I would love to hear your perspective, your thoughts, your comments, questions, concerns about this topic. If you would like to weigh in, if you would like to carry on the conversation, you can send us an email over at creepsandcoffee@gmail.com. You can send us a message over on our Instagram or our Twitter at creepsandcoffee. Or if you would like an even more in-depth look at what goes on in the life of Kait and Jaim and get some awesome bonus content and exclusive access to an extra special bonus episode every month, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/creepsandcoffee. Over there, you can join in on our free subscription and really get a look at some extra special content from us. Or if you would like to help support the show, we do have a paid tier, which comes with some extra special perks. We would love to have your support. We are so appreciative of you and all that you do, even just by listening. We love doing this show. I'm excited to be doing some more solo stuff. And yeah, let us know if there's any topics you'd be interested in hearing about, if there's anything specific you would like to chat with us about. We would love to hear it. So thank you again for listening. We love you. Jamie will be back before you guys know it, but in the meantime, she is sending her love, and so am I. Have a wonderful day, night, afternoon, evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. We will chat with you next time. Bye!
Creeps and Coffee is produced and edited by us, Kait and Jaim.
Our theme music is Stuck in a Hole by Dated.
For more information on where to find them, check out the link in our show notes. And to connect with us, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Creeps and Coffee.